Good afternoon, everybody. This is my dear old friend and Dharma sister, Mirabai Bush. We go way back. Mirabai and I met in 1971 in India. She introduced me to she and her husband, John Krishna Bush, of the Yatra film trilogy. She and Krishna introduced me to my first guru, Nim Karoli Baba, and first told me about Goenkaji and Vipassana meditation in 1971 in India. So she's always been like a mentor and a guru to me, and I always looked up to her. Although she doesn't look down at anybody, she sees everybody I thou, but I always look up to her. And really I'm honored to introduce you today, my dear Mirabai. There's a lot to say about her, and I want to keep it short so we get to know her and hear from her and meet her, and there'll be Q&A at the end. She's also going to speak tonight and tomorrow morning. She's driven over from her home near Northampton, Massachusetts, where she's the founder of the Contemplative Mind in Society project and has been the executive director and the main person there for over a decade. Is it 15 years by now? And they have wonderful projects, including academic practitioners who research and contribute to this field, neuroscience and meditation, lead retreats at places like Yale Law School, retreats for rabbis, at corporations for executives like Mount Santo, the Army, and so on. She's very much as a, what journal was it that called you?
Shambhala Sun.
As the great Shambhala Sun, where you read all the news fit to print. Or maybe that's the Times, the other newspaper, called her the Grand Dame of contemplation in America. And she is grand, she is a Dame, she should have been knighted if she hasn't yet been. Mirabai and I were in India together, as I said, with our guru. We did insight meditations together. She's been doing Buddhist meditation for 40 years at least. She studied with many of my teachers and your teachers, Kalu Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Sasaki Roshi, probably Sokni Rinpoche, I don't know, so many, too many, Swami Muktananda. Like me, Mira has done it with them all. And she's co-author of a book with Ram Dass called Compassion in Action. She's done a lot of great work in helping to bring the Dharma from the east to the west and establish it here, and especially bridging and bringing it into the mainstream. For many years, she has given the Integration Day talk at the end of the 3-month retreat at Insight Meditation Society, IMS, the great meditation center in Barre, Massachusetts. At the end, they bring in Mirabai to talk about integration with daily life because she's such a worldly, integrated person. She used to have a business with her husband, Krishna Bush, called Illuminations, where they practiced right in the 70s and 80s, practiced right livelihood, conscious investing, conscious capitalism. She was part of the forefront of that field. So I wanted to ask her to talk about, as we've gone through view, meditation, and somewhat action and service, and spontaneous, proactive Buddha activity, not just reactive, ego-centered, karmic activity. Warm-hearted leadership, as she called it at our lunch together. I wanted to ask her to talk about these things for us as we enter the integration part of the week of silent, intensive Dzogchen retreat. So there's many other things I could tell, and stories, and how she always has a New Year's Eve party at her house, solstice parties, Thanksgivings, how she just became a grandmother, and all the beautiful other things that she does and is. But you will find it all out when she starts more speaking. Thank you for coming. It's so beautiful to see you and be with you together as always.
Well, nothing I say will live up to that introduction for sure. And also I was reflecting on how you might be very welcoming of me, but also be feeling like you would be missing a talk by Suryadas this afternoon. But we got a really nice dose of your loving heart. Thank you. Hi. This is great. I've been at Garrison many times in this room, and so interesting because, you know, whatever's happening here, there's a whole kind of different feeling and look to it, and so on. I was here one time with a group of college and university chaplains who was really interesting. They were mostly chaplains who were interested in or had some project in service with their students, but they were looking for a way to take it deeper, and they didn't have any meditation practice. So they were mostly Christian, but there was Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Buddhist, and there were teachers from each tradition. And but that happened right here. It was really an amazing group, and also was here with social justice activists, you know, wondering if they meditate, will they lose their anger? You know, I mean, most of us want to lose it, but but you know, if you feel like that's where your energy's coming from, righteous anger, you know, against injustice, there's a fear that there isn't anything deeper than that. If you let go of that there's nothing that's going to motivate you, like compassion, for example. But we had some fierce talks in this room about that. So it's just really, it's a great space here, really wonderful. I thought I'm going to, such a big subject, integration. I mean, it's everything. So since all of life is the field for integration, there are just lots of things to talk about. But I thought over these couple of hours that we have, that I'd talk a little bit about integration in your personal life and in your profession or livelihood, your work, and then in your relationship to the larger world. And but before, and I'm going to start by telling you some of my personal stories, some experiences that led to here and what it's been like to try to do this all these years. Before we start, I thought, and we'll also do some practices. We'll do one this afternoon. But before we start, I'd love to hear from some of you anyhow. What's your question about integration? You know, what is it that, when you think integrating these amazing practices that you've been so present with over these last days, when you think about that and the rest of your life, I know that some of you have been doing this for years and others of you are new to it, but what questions do you have about going back? Anything at all, yeah?
I'm wondering how after being here for a week, I'm very motivated to keep up the practices, the meditation and the prayers. But knowing me, you know, it's probably not going to take that long before I lose the inspiration. And I'm just wondering how to keep myself inspired to keep doing the practices.
It's great. Not only you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? I hope you have some questions. Otherwise, yeah. Yes. Yes, you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would love to, I don't know how to articulate my question,
Yeah.
but it has to do with integrating this the spiritual practice, the spiritual awareness into doing true work, as opposed to doing the job that pays the bills. And I haven't figured out yet how to fully liberate myself from that vicious circle.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear your insights.
Great,
Thanks.
I'd very much like to hear your insights about Buddhist practice and money and financial matters and how best to integrate all the practices into making and giving away money.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
I'd like to hear something about seva, service, and balancing your seva with your practice.
Great in daily life.
I don't have a profession to go back to. I'm retired.
Great.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there are things, of course, that I do, but I'd like to ask you to talk about how to integrate after the career part of life is over.
I'm just learning that, so that's great. I like that question, yeah.
Mirabai, can you talk a little bit about finding a balance between commercialism in putting out the Dharma, appealing to people's materialism, versus going too far with that?
Good one.
I was wondering if you could talk about having something to integrate. Sometimes I feel like there's this focus on integration and like you don't have a strong foundation of practice to integrate. So how to kind of carve that out.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's the advanced class.
Hi, just fundamentally how to improve your basic daily relationships with your kids, your family, your friends, your husband.
Hi, Mirabai. I really like Surya's suggestion that I move my office into the temple here. But since that may not be able to be, I'd like to hear you help me with the question of being more comfortable in the world, because the people that I'm surrounded by here are so different than the people I'm surrounded by in the world, and how to embrace that rather than get pulled down by it.
I have a good story for you. I'll save it, though.
If you could speak about here, it seems like we have such a protected space, but when we leave, that's when all the well, not all, but it seems like the things that cause us stress more so, they seem to really take off. So how to work with that more skillfully?
Great. In the great perfection. Those were just the things I was going to talk about. What a coincidence. That's really good. No, that's really helpful. It's a range, and I know there's a bigger range than that also. I mean, I know for some people, for example, more stress comes up when you're sitting, and then you can go back out into the world, and partly because there's so many distractions, feels less stressful. So, I mean, there are, for every question, there's the opposite question. I know that. Well, when I first learned to meditate many, many years ago. But it's now like 40 years ago when I first met Surya. We were at the same university. I was a teaching assistant getting my PhD. He was an undergraduate, but we didn't, and we'd heard about each other, and but we hadn't met in Buffalo. But his roommate, this is the way I remember the story. His roommate was one of my best students, and he took all my courses. And he told Surya Das, and we were all, it was 1969 and 70, we were all in total turmoil. And you know, if you've read Surya's bio. And so his roommate knew that I was going to India and told Surya, who was also going to India. So he was kind of on the looking for me there among the 1 billion people. That was good. He just thought, oh, no problem, you know, see if she shows up, you know. And then found my name on a guest book on a houseboat on Dal Lake in Srinagar in Kashmir, where you can't even go anymore. And then tracked me down up in the mountains where I'd gone after leaving the houseboat. So it was a connection that was supposed to happen, obviously. I first went to India, so I thought I'd be there for 2 weeks. I was kind of going around the world looking for the meaning of life, just trying to make sense of things. And that was one of the places I was going to go. It was pretty casual. And I ended up staying for 2 years. And it was because in those first 2 weeks, I went to this first course that Goenka was teaching to Westerners, we were called. And after 10 days, I just, you know, all the struggles that I've been through, all of a sudden there was a little beam of light into them. I really got the glimpse that, you know, there might be a way to make sense of all of this. And so I just stayed, and I kept doing one course after another and studied with various teachers and so on. And there were quite a group of us together there. There were many, at that time, Westerners who were doing the same thing, looking around for some answers. And so many of the people who were there at that time came back, when they came back, or didn't come back, stayed in monasteries, the way Surya studied for so many years. And others came back, like Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, and I'm sure, and many others who some of you know. And we were all in love with the Dharma, and we had discovered this great thing. And so everybody was full speed ahead into it. And so many people started centers and so on. But when I came back from India, I was pregnant with my son. And so I couldn't go into a monastery. I was also married, so I couldn't go into a monastery. Couldn't do long meditation retreats, and but wanted to figure out a way. And I thought, this isn't just, it's not just Buddhist practice, it's not just spiritual practice, this is human practice. This is changing the way I understand the world. There must be a way in which you can live this and not be in a monastery. And so I kind of set about trying to figure that out. And the first chapter was, we also had to, you can imagine if I went for 2 weeks and stayed for 2 years, I came home pretty broke. So we had to create some livelihood. And I didn't want to go back to teaching. And so my then husband and I started this little business. We had a very pure sense, or a fundamentalist probably sense, of what right livelihood was. And I mean, you know, they say in the text, I think I have it here, they say about right livelihood that, I mean, they say especially, don't trade in arms, in living beings, in intoxicating drinks, and in poison. So that really leaves quite a wide range of things that you can do. But we had a narrower sense of it. And so we decided that we were going to create mandalas. Okay, we had looked at all the great religions and spiritual traditions of the world and saw that this was the one form that existed in every tradition that represented the one and the many. So we thought we would create these mandalas, and we wanted them to look the way they look in the mind when you do a visualization meditation. So it was a kind of transparent glow. So we silk screened them onto clear plastic, and then they had glue on the back, and they went on windows. And then the light would come through, and we just thought we had created the perfect product, you know. And in the beginning, we traded them in health food stores, and then we sold them for $1, and you know. And little by little, and they were called Dharma seals. So this is kind of play on words. And they were very popular. It was back in the time when all of this was just beginning. There wasn't any, you know, spiritual paraphernalia around, and people loved them. But and then little by little they grew. And one day, and I remember we were so proud of them. And Kalu Rinpoche came to stay with us one time in Cambridge, where we were living. And, you know, we offered them. We had done one for Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, was one of the first Tibetan teachers, and he gave a Dharma festival in those first years, and he asked us to do one of the double dorje. You know, we did this. So when Kalu Rinpoche came to visit, we presented him with the double dorje and the whole earth with "May all beings be happy" around the outside. And we said, you know, here's what we do for livelihood. And he said, we said, is it, you know, do you think it's good? And he said, as long as it gives you time to practice. I mean, we could have just handed him anything, you know. It was really funny. But we did, anyhow, it grew. And when we, one time to test the colors, we silk screened a rainbow so we could see the clarity of the colors. And then we gave them away to our friends because we thought they really weren't very spiritual. But although we had written on the label that it was the universal symbol of peace and harmony. But anyhow, rainbow took us into the mainstream. They got very popular. We sold millions and millions of these rainbows. They were everywhere. And so we had to then engage the real business community, not just the health food stores. And it was very interesting. We were still like really young and trying to figure it all out. And so we thought, well, you know, one of the principles was always tell the truth. So we were all, I mean, it grew so that we had 65, 80 people working. And we would meet every week and sit on the floor and meditate, and then we'd discuss what should be the guiding principles for right livelihood. And so one of them was always tell the truth. So we would do things like, we would order from a Boston printer, and he'd say, when do you need them? And we'd say Friday. And he'd say, oh, okay. Assuming that we meant we didn't really need it till the following week, because that's what everybody said. You know, you ask for it knowing that it's not going to be done then, and you just, you know, you've left yourself this margin of error because nobody really tells the truth around those things. So we had to tell the truth. We had to take the consequences also, which was always being late delivering things because we never had built in that margin. But it was the first experiment of trying to do things by the principles of the Dharma that we're learning in this room, and seeing by doing that how, you know, how not just American, but, you know, like the world gets the ways in which it is and isn't based on those same principles, and how everybody kind of is in kind of collaboration, even though it's unconscious a lot, about doing things that way. And you all know, anyone who's ever had a job knows that there are ways in which we work and ways in which organizations are structured that are not wholesome. They don't really help people. They don't help us grow. They don't help us tell the truth. They don't. But when you begin to try to work by those principles, then it illuminates what's going on. So many things happened in that chapter, and that I learned a lot from. And then the next thing was a number of us who had been in India and Nepal and studied with teachers and also lived in communities there and just made many friends there. And this is back in the day before there's the new India and so on. So, I mean, there was tremendous poverty and simplicity. And in Nepal, in the mountain villages, a lot of suffering, so, although a lot of joy also. But so we wanted to do something in response to the sacred hospitality we had received. So some people who had been with us were doctors, been trained as doctors and epidemiologists, but were, once they got to India, just became meditators, you know. But then when on return, then we had to pick up our lives again. So and some of those folks got involved in India in the project on ending smallpox. And the last cases of smallpox were in India and in Bangladesh in '76. So they came back and wanted to do something in international public health for India and Nepal. And so, and many of us who didn't have those skills through studying the Dharma, had become really committed to seva, to selfless service, to recognizing that because we are all interconnected, that we all, once you realize that, then you are drawn to the service of the whole and drawn to the service of others and toward the relief of suffering. Even if you don't formally take the bodhisattva vow, you're just naturally more drawn to helping others and relieving suffering. So we started a foundation. It was called Seva. We had an acronym that was a Society for Epidemiological and Voluntary Assistance, but we made that up so that it would spell out Seva, which means selfless service in Sanskrit. And we started off trying to do it in a new way. And there were many things that happened. But I worked for 10 years of that. I worked in development in Guatemala. And it started out in India and Nepal with blindness and so on, but then it kept growing. Again, you know, we questioned all the principles that development is based on. And I always like that in Spanish, the word for development is desarrollo, which means unfolding. And I just like that. It was like the experience was one of unfolding. It was just kind of opening up and seeing what was needed and seeing unfolding so the growth could happen from within. We spent a lot of time there questioning and bringing in understandings that had come from practice, like that questioning dualism, for example, you know, that it's this or that, when in fact we know that it's all interconnected and that it's very rarely a static this or that everything's is changing all the time. So we, for example, we worked in these very poor communities. There were many communities then where there were only women because the army had killed all the men in the community. So there were only women left. And and corn is the mainstay of Guatemalans, and it's a very labor-intensive crop. So we were trying to work with these women to find other things that they could grow. They could support themselves until things changed again. And, but in the beginning, there was no food, there was nothing. There was no food, there was no money, there were no seeds, there were no animals. And so we had to find food somewhere. So it became a kind of project of giving aid. And we recognize and learn more over time that, of course, when you just give something to somebody, particularly in an international situation, it sets up a situation of dependence, and it's not empowering to people and so on. So we thought we shouldn't give aid, we should just teach people to fish, teach people to, in that case, have kitchen gardens, and there was a whole system. And then so we were going along, and the new gardens were working, and everybody was taking charge of their lives and growing. And then one season, there was this terrible blight. And we got there, and there was no food again. The whole crop had been destroyed. And we got into this discussion, those of us who thought, never give aid. It's demoralizing, disempowering. And people who said, well, you have to give aid because, people are hungry. And in any profession you get into these, people get into camps around things, and schools of thought. And here we were, and people were starving. So we sat with each other, and all of us, and recognizing that it's unlikely to be one or the other particular if we were fixed in these ideas about them, that there could be a way in which we could find a middle path. And in fact, we did. We brought in food, but the food came, with the food, we used the food as education around how to do certain kinds of things that then would lead to a more successful crop the next season, and so we brought those two together. But I guess that, no matter what it is that you decide to do, it doesn't matter if you're selling rainbows or you are, you're looking at people starving, that there are ways in which exactly what you learn sitting on the cushion, it's so wild that it's true, that you learn by looking in your own mind, that then when you take it out into the world, it gives you this potential for understanding things and working through things in such a different way if you really trust it. So then that work led to what I've been doing for the last 15 years, which is bringing practices. We work with we call them contemplative practices. We draw from many different traditions. But of course, as you know, the Buddhist tradition has been the most kind of faithful to the meditative traditions for these 2,500 years, although they've existed in every religious and spiritual tradition. And there's been a recovery in the last 10 or 15 years of these practices in Christianity, Judaism, and so on. But Buddhist practice has always been the heart of it. And our goal was to bring practice and the perspective or understanding that comes from practice into mainstream settings. So as Surya said, we've worked in business, we've worked a lot in higher education, we've worked with lawyers and judges and environmentalists Recently, we've done a big program with Google in Silicon Valley with young engineers and scientists, and with the Army, with caregivers in the Army, chaplains and medics. And it's interesting because when we first considered doing this, there was a chaplain who was, as you can imagine, even if you don't know, there's huge suffering going on among the caregivers in the Army. So they suffer from what's called secondary trauma. So they're taking on the suffering of others without knowing how to let it go. And so this person, who was a Christian chaplain, family therapist, officer, went looking around for some new possibilities, and he found a meditation teacher in Cambridge, Larry Rosenberg, and learned basic meditation practice from him, and then began to think about how it could happen in the Army. So he found the center on the web, which is, I mean, for such a deep and profound thing, somehow or other, I mean, I know we use the web for everything, but somehow or other, the day he walked into my office in full camouflage with his big boots and said, I want to talk about whether meditation could help in the Army, I thought, whoa, he found us on the web, that's so wild. But anyhow, he did. And then we had a lot of conversations about it. And, then I was here for a meeting of the Mind and Life organization they give out fellowships to young scientists to do research in meditation. And they were having a meeting here one time, and I was here right at that time. And I remember we had just had a meditation, and I walked out the doors and I walked outside, and I just stood there looking across at West Point and thinking about all that I'd been hearing about what was going on, and thinking about whether this would be, right livelihood. Would this be a good thing to do? And of course, there are big questions. It raises all kinds of questions we might talk some more about that are really interesting. But I finally felt that there was so much suffering. They say that old expression, I think it's from the First World War, that there are no atheists in foxholes. And do you know that? So you'd think that even if people weren't religious or spiritual, that if at any time in their life they were going to be, it would be then, in the face of terror. There's one chaplain for every 1,000 soldiers. So anyhow, I said yes, but it was right here looking across, so next time you look across there, you can think about those guys. So that's basically what I want to work with over these next few days, just ways in which to see your work and your life as the meditation hall. It is the practice, and there are so many ways. It's not to say that retreats aren't important. They're extremely important to renew your practice, but bringing it into whatever it is you're doing is just so. And of course, you've all been doing it anyhow, but I mean, the more in which we can do it, the more exciting it is. One thing I've been looking at recently in this work we've been doing is, it happened kind of, but we didn't intend it to happen, but by bringing together people of common interests. So we'd bring together a whole group of judges in a room and meditate for 3 days, or environmentalists or journalists or whomever. And then as part of it, as part of their integration, we'd have small group conversations about, what is the connection between the Dharma and the law, and so on. The environmentalists say, we are exploring the inner habitat. But when people would start asking that together, they started looking into the nature of whatever their work or profession is, What does it really mean to educate, I love this one, architects. Someone said a contemplative building, they say, what is it that we're really doing? They start thinking about creating, structures that, and then what is it? That a contemplative building is one in which the inside is larger than the outside. The experience yourself when the inside feels like the entire universe, which it is, of course. And then you open your eyes and you're just this little person sitting here. Yeah. So I've been, I'll share some things with you and we'll talk about the possibility of this inquiry into what it is you're really doing. And also the remembering of original motivation to do those things. I mean, often, not long into life as a grown-up, people have already forgotten why they have chosen to do what they've done. And when it comes back, it's very powerful. We did a retreat one time with lawyers, litigators at the Federal Trade Commission. It was soon after 9/11. And the FTC is on Pennsylvania Avenue, halfway between the Capitol and the White House. And there are these trucks coming and going all the time and dropping things off. And that was, it's almost hard to remember now, but they were terrified. Every time they looked out, and these were grown-up lawyers, and every time they looked out the window, they saw one of these trucks come pulling into their driveway. They were terrified. And they were right in between these two big targets. And they were having trouble going to work in the morning. And it was pretty across the board. So we decided to have a retreat just for reducing stress. But of course, many other things came up. And one of the really moving parts was we did a meditation in which people got back to what was the first thing that really made you choose being a public interest lawyer? They recruit from the best schools. They have people who could be working in private practice or corporate practice for 10 times what they were making at the FTC. What made you, and this is also right after Bush had come in, and they were most career lawyers working, public interest lawyers working for the government are Democrats. So they were really, John Ashcroft had come in as the Attorney General and was calling prayer meetings in his office, and they were really discouraged. They didn't know how they could fit into this. And anyhow, we did this meditation weekend, and they looked at what originally, people told stories about their grandfathers, or they told stories about some act of injustice that had happened that had awakened them, and why is it that we're doing what we're doing? Getting back to what that really is. And what is it that we're doing? What is the nature of what we're doing? Those are really, practice helps you ask those questions and look at them. It's not like there's always an answer, but to investigate those questions about your work in the same way that you're investigating the nature of your mind. Same same way, no judgment, looking deeply, and looking deeply again. It's so interesting. So anyhow, we'll talk a little more about that. And so, but now what I wanted us to do is I was just saying to Sherry before, the big difference between sitting here and going back out into the world, the biggest difference is that there will be other people in your life. It's true that there are other people here, and you like stood behind them on the line to get your meal and formed an opinion about whoever it was. But that's not quite the same as what you're going to need to do when you go back out. Relationships with family, people you work with, and so on. That's the biggest difference. And so what comes with that is the importance of practicing mindful speaking, listening, communicating, being able to be with others. So whether it's work or home. So I thought that we might do a little practice in speaking and listening mindfully. And I know you haven't been talking. So this isn't really talking. This is practicing talking. So you don't have to feel like you're breaking silence. But you will actually be opening your mouth and words will come out. But you're not breaking silence till tomorrow. So this is Sunday. Tomorrow night. And of course, but even in a practice, speaking is strange when you haven't been doing it. And you'll notice many things. But we're going to use this practice. This practice is essentially a listening practice, but it's mindful communicating. And some of you have done it before. It's adapted in different ways in therapy and other forms, mediation. We started doing it with, in retreats we did for lawyers who expressed that the thing that they needed to learn most was mindful listening. So, and now I love this practice. So what we're going to do is we're going to be in pairs, and the practice of listening mindfully is simply sitting there in silence and fully and wholeheartedly, lovingly listen to the other person. And just as with practice with your eyes closed, as thoughts and emotions arise, you just notice them and let them go. You'll be looking at the other person, but your mind will come up with things. You know, when we listen, we have opinions about what's being said, judgments. We have, oh, that's something like that happened to me last week, you know, and you want to share that. Or, I know just what you should do, you know? But we're not going to share any of that today. What we're going to do is just simply listen. And this is not to say that every time you listen to someone, you should listen this way. Of course, you know, there's exchange and conversation. But this is to refine your ability to see what's in your mind and to really be fully present with whoever is there. That's your work now, to just listen to this other person. And the person who's speaking will speak. I'm going to give you a prompt, and then and I'll give you a few moments of silence before. But this is a practice. It doesn't, to some degree, it doesn't matter what you're saying, okay? You're practicing speaking as honestly and fully as you can to the other person in response to this prompt, and the other person's listening. So don't worry if you can't think of anything profound to say. It doesn't really matter, you know. And then I'll ring a bell after not long, 3 or 4 minutes, and then the person who's been listening will say, what I heard you saying is, not word for word, you're paraphrasing, but the essence of it. This is what I heard you saying. And because that is, after all, what we want from the person who's listening to us. And then the person who's been speaking, who was originally speaking, will say, yeah, that's almost right, but you kind of, that central point I was making, you got it backwards, so, and then, or however you say it, whatever it is. So that the person who was the speaker, by the end of this exchange, feels like she's really been heard. She's been heard. And then you're going to change roles, and then the other person's going to do it. And then at the end, we'll talk about that a little bit. But so this is offered to help you as you re-enter with other people. So find a partner, just turn to somebody next to you, and if you don't have one at the end, we'll match you up. The first time I had to speak after being silent for a long time, 10 days or something, I said, what am I going to do? How do you do it? And because when these first retreats were taught, teachers didn't quite have it together yet. So person I asked said, oh, it's easy. Just say what you know. Don't say what you don't know. I said, oh my God, I'm never going to speak again. So don't get rigid, but that's the spirit in which we'll do this. So now let's all just take a couple of minutes, and the prompt is, and also, if this prompt doesn't work for you, you can talk about anything. So, but here it is. You're probably all quite suggestible at this point, so you'll probably like it. One part of my life in which I could be more aware is. So now close your eyes for a couple of minutes and just see what arises. Now open your eyes and decide who will speak first. And then begin. And I'll ring a bell when the time's up. Now the listener will say, what I heard you saying was, and then go back and forth until you get it. We're okay.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, now reverse roles, and the person who is a listener becomes a speaker. Okay, what I heard you saying. And now, it's always hard to get people to stop talking. And now, in whatever way is appropriate in either silence or words, thank your partner for being in practice with you and helping you with this. And then come back to your places. We have a few minutes left, and so if anybody has any reflections or questions or thoughts about what you learned. Yes?
I found it amazing how much we actually add to someone's story, and how much we project into it and make assumptions based on what we're actually hearing. So even if we can recall what it is they're saying, when we play it back, it seems like we get that at best, and then some kind of shading it in a particular direction or adding insights, so to speak, to what we've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, going down the line.
And see, in terms of building a relationship, that can be positive, but in terms of seeing things as they are, as the ground of, it just reveals to you that it takes a lot of awareness to just see things as they are without adding to it. Yeah, it's great.
I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but was struck by the commonality. I have not met my partner other than sitting next to them before, and how we really had a similar story.
Yeah, I think that, the truth is if you go deep enough, everybody has a similar story. And when you're in this kind of context, you're more likely to tell tell your story from a place where the other person can recognize that, I think, but it's nice.
From the point of view of active listening, I've been in situations where I'm taking instruction and there's lots of jargon and maybe you can't take notes fast enough, so I repeat to myself identically what the person is saying to me, and that allows it to go in. But I find that there's an emotional disconnect when that's happening, because you can't connect with the person when you're going, okay, they said, you know, take tab A and put it in slot B, da 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 da.
Yeah.
You know, so
That's
where-
why
where's
this,
the
well, this isn't about, you know, kind of memorizing what they're saying, but it's really listening wholeheartedly so that you get the spirit of what they're saying and the meaning of what they're saying, as well as the words. And, you know, especially if you've been trained that way, that, you know, it doesn't come automatically. That's why this is a practice, like all practices. You know, you have to keep doing it, and then you see that that's going on in your mind, and then you see that's effective for learning certain things, and there are other ways of listening that are good for other moments. So that's...
Well, in this practice, because you were instructing us, we were able to sit and just give our undivided attention to our partner, and it just impressed upon me the importance of deep, deep listening. But when we get out there in our normal lives, we're not going to be able to do that as much unless we're in therapy or something. And we do tend to interrupt or interpret way before the person really expresses what they really need to. So that just reminded me of how important it is to listen deeply.
So practice is the key. So sometime, you know, before you're going to have a conversation with somebody, you can say to yourself, or it's a good friend, you can say to that person too, but okay, I'm gonna, during this one time, I'm gonna listen mindfully to this person, you know, and keep seeing what happens, because it takes practice, yeah.
Well, I appreciated the opportunity for a number of reasons. I had a little more opportunity to think about myself, and I appreciated the prompt. And then, having been silent all week, to have another human address me.
It's big.
It was like, wow, I have a Buddha buddy. And that was very special. I met an amazing man.
It just felt like such a gift to speak and have somebody really listen. It was very nourishing. And also to listen in the same spirit also felt as nourishing. That in that moment, there was nothing more important than hearing her and listening to what she's saying, as opposed to what I could say to give her advice or all that other stuff. It just felt like so nourishing on both sides for me. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah, I thought it was excellent, and I think it's interesting too to see as a listener how empowering it is that your mere presence is really what's required.
Yeah. Most of the time, that's true.
And that you don't have to be busy trying to figure out for the other person what, oh, I know, just your presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, my partner and I also had similar stories, but what I took from this was when she was repeating back what I said, I thought to myself, I'm really tired of telling this story. And
that's great.
Who would I be without the story I've been telling for so long? And I think I'm sort of ready to find something else.
That's great. It's a great sign. It's scary too, but there'll be many more stories that will emerge for you.
I found it very difficult to listen at first. Like this was a test, and I was going to be, how was I going to get the right grade? But then after a moment or two, or half of, I don't know how long, but I got caught up in what he was saying, and I found it easy to sort of dissolve myself away from it, kind of. But that's not the important thing. The important thing I want to say is that in having my story told back to me, my partner realized for me a generalization about a situation, two situations, and connected them in ways that I had never connected before, and it was for me a very, very important experience.
It's great. Yeah. You never know when that possibility is going to present itself, so it's good to be there, present, just in case.
Me too. My partner really heard me and gave me an insight that I would never have had on my own, and I'm really grateful for that.
You know, there's one of the, I'm just remembering, you know, one of the great things about retreat is that you get into this great space, you know, and then you get to really appreciate other humans, you know, and so I always say, you know, you have to be careful you don't fall in love with a guy who, you know, pumps your gas when you're on your way home, you know, it's like, and this last year I was, it's true, I was driving from, I think from Menla. I was on the New York Thruway, and I was, you know, being really mindful, and I was listening to sounds, and I was noticing that, you know, the way my hands felt on the wheel, and I was driving along, and I looked up, and I saw a state trooper on the side of the road up ahead. And I looked down, and I saw that I was driving at 80 miles an hour. One of the things I hadn't been mindful about. But I thought, oh, but there he is, and I see him, and so I will slow right down to 65, which I did, and I felt so pleased with myself. And then I drove past him, and next thing I knew, he was behind me, and he pulled me over, you know, and I was still so much in the kind of zone of moment to moment, and I hadn't seen that many people. And he came up to me and he said, well, you know, I was in the registration. He said, I clocked you at 80 miles an hour. I said, no, I know I was going 65. I didn't say, I had been going 80 and I slowed down, but I genuinely meant it. You know, I said, no, I was doing 65. But I looked at him and he looked so great. You know, it was just so, and I couldn't shake out of that place. I couldn't like get into, you know, I should be stressed, you know, I should be, I just was like so happy to see him. So he said, oh, and oh, well, then I guess I can give you a form that says that your speedometer is broken. And you just have to take it to your garage and have them confirm it and then send it in. And then he said, and if it's not really broken, it doesn't really matter. If you send in the form, they're not going to give you the ticket. And then we said goodbye to each other. I drove up the road. So I'd forgotten about it, but seeing you all like this was like that. I've never seen this person before, but they're so wonderful. You know? So, well, may all your relationships be this good. I'll see you tonight. Thank you very much.